Hello and welcome back to another edition of Telescope Man. This is going to be number 3 in a series of beginner ham radio podcasts. And again, I'm going to try to use pictures to kind of tell a little story and maybe teach some of the newbies out there some basic ham shack setup techniques. So, without further ado, let's get going. Let's open up the pictures. And today's presentation is going to be really about grounding and what we call RF, radio frequency, in the shack where you don't want it. So we're going to do a little talking about grounding, proper grounding, and show you some of the things that I've been using here in my shack to eliminate any problems with grounding. Now I gotta say, when I first started, my grounding was terrible. I was using regular wire. Even though it was 8-gauge wire, it was regular wire to ground all the equipment. And I also made another fatal mistake, which I'll show you when I first set up the grounding. And it was really so bad that the USB ports on my computer would disconnect whenever I keyed up. And many times the ICOM 7000 would just shut off because RF was getting back into the radio, which was no good. So I had to really start reading a lot about proper grounding, because I had thought that a heavy gauge wire would work to ground the equipment. And of course my technique for connecting that all together behind the radios was wrong too. So let's get started. First, I want to show you what one of the proper things is you should use to ground all the equipment, and that's braid. And you can find all types of braid, all lengths, some with connectors and some just plain braid. Basically I use just plain braid. I haven't really went out and bought these little end connectors like what you see here and make it all look real pretty and nice. I simply poke a hole in the braid using a pen or a pencil. Just poke a little hole, and then I use a bolt, stainless steel bolt, to connect the pieces of braid together. I don't really use these end connectors like you see here, but you can buy them that way, or you can make them if you so choose to do so. Now I'm going to give you a suggestion. You can jump on eBay and put in grounding braid, and you're going to get bunches and bunches of folks selling this braid. Now the other item that's used for grounding is strips of copper, and I'm going to show you that in a little while. You can use that too. That's also very good. I just chose braid. I went out to eBay and bought about 25 feet of braid and 3/4 inch, and that's what I'm using to ground all the equipment. So this is what I'm talking about right here, this braid. And of course you can buy it in strips. This is what I did. I bought strips of it off of eBay. And you can buy all different lengths. You want to get at least 1/2 inch, preferably 3/4 inch. The 1 inch is also very good, but it gets a little bit expensive. I'd say 3/4 inch will be just fine. If you follow all these different techniques, your ground will be just fine. On a later video, I'll show you the outside ground rod. There is a grounding rod right outside the window that's about 8 feet in the ground, and basically everything winds up connected to that rod, and it's a very short distance away from all the radios, right outside the window, which is behind my radio. So the distance that final braid grounding strap goes is not very far. I would say from the window to the ground rod outside is probably no more than 4 feet. So I have a very short ground, and it's a straight run directly from the equipment outside to the grounding rod. So anyway, I'm using this braid to ground all the equipment. And again, you can get on eBay and just search for grounding braid, and you'll get all kind of hits and people selling this grounding braid. All right, so the real thing about grounding the equipment, and probably the most important thing, is I found a site, and I've got a couple of the pictures off that site on the internet that showed the proper way to ground. So let's start with the improper way to ground. So here's a little diagram. Now this is the way I had it originally. Originally, I had a grounding bar right here, a grounding bar behind the equipment, and then I just came on down, you know, and I attached all my other equipment, the tuner, the amp, the radios to this ground bar, and then I picked a spot and I went outside and put it on the ground rod. And I thought I was doing really good. Unfortunately, what happened, and a lot of people do this, and when they have problems, some of them don't know what's going on, but this fully explains it. You run a great risk of having what's called a ground loop develop, and it's the ungrounded ground. It's not really grounded. You've got a ground loop in here, and this stuff will get back into the tuner and back into the amp and back into your radio and cause you a world of problems. Like I told you, it was so bad that my computer, which was across the room from the radios, all the USB ports would disconnect. You know, they do that little sound, ba-bong, you know, every time when I keyed up. And to get the computer working again, I'd have to turn it off and turn it back on again to get the USB ports to connect again. So this is not the way to do a ground. And you'll see a lot of things on there where they've got the wires running in this kind of configuration. And this is improper. This is not the way to do it. So if you've got a rig you're running this way and it seems to be working, you can sure improve it by changing this up. And I think this also has a lot to do with my low noise level. I think this really affected my lowering the noise floor in the radios when I corrected all this. So this is not how you want to do it. So how do you want to do it? Well, let's just change it a little bit. Now here's what I did. I considered the tuner, the antenna tuner, to be the main spot, because that's what's actually making the antenna wire become resonant. So I ran a very short piece of braid off of this antenna tuner, and then I attached all the other pieces of equipment directly to that braid and straight out into the ground, as this indicates. Okay, so I didn't try to come down here and connect this amp onto this piece of braid here. I ran a separate piece of braid to one common spot, And how I did that, I just punched a little hole into the braid, and then I used some washers, steel washers, and stainless steel bolts and screws and nuts to attach all this other braid to this one point, which was very close to this antenna tuner. So this piece of braid is not very long. I would say it's less than 1 foot. I tried to connect all of the braid directly to the wing nut on the manual antenna tuner, but braid being braid, I couldn't get them on there, and it was a real pain to if I ever wanted to disconnect things and go outside with them. It was real tough to disconnect this. So I just dropped down a few inches and made that the common point, and it seems to have worked just fine. And the minute I did this, I had no more RF in the shack, radio frequency in the shack. The computer USB ports never dropped out again, and the ICOM 7000 never shut off when I keyed up on HF like it was doing with the old grounding configuration. So this has been, for me, a spectacular little drawing that really helped me correct the grounding inside the shack. If you'll follow this and pick a single point coming off the antenna tuner, or if you can get them all, you know, on the antenna tuner to that one point, that would be good too. And then just have a single piece of braid or copper strap. You can use copper strap too, and I'll show you that in a minute. You can run that out to the ground rod. All right, so let me kind of show you a picture of that copper strap. Here's a picture of the bottom of a tower, and you can see they've got a ground rod right here, and they've got a leg of this this tower with a piece of copper strap, and they've got that grounded into that ground rod. So you can use this kind of material too. You'll find that on the internet available. If you prefer that over braid, that would work just as good, and probably would work even better. But I went with the braid, and it certainly has good enough ground for my uses anyway. But strap will work just as well, if not better. Can get a little pricey. All right, so now you've got it grounded. Everything seems to be grounded, but you have to worry about something else, and that's what's called common mode currents. When you connect that coax to the antenna, to your HF antenna, and you run it back into your shack, it's possible for current to run on the outside of the coax, run all the way back in the shack, and get into the radios and everything else. And that's called common mode currents. And there's ways to keep that out of the shack, which with what's called a choke balun. And I'm going to show you various types of choke baluns. You can buy them commercially and already built, or you can make them yourself. So let me just show you various pictures of how you keep the RF out of the shack from coming back down the outside of the coax. Okay, there's several ways you can do that. One way is you can wind a coax into a coil. You have to be careful you don't overextend the coax. You know, you can only bend it so far, and the manufacturers tell you what the diameter, the minimum diameter is that you can bend it. They have that in the specifications. If you overbend it, then you run the risk of breaking the inside of the coax, the foil shield or the insulation or something like that inside, if you try to make the wrap too small for that type of coax. But here's a fella, and he made a choke ballon off a coax by wrapping it around and around several times and then tying it with some wire ties. And what happens is the current, this creates an impedance to the current, and the current doesn't keep flowing down the coax. It stops right here. That's the idea of this. So you can make them. Some people make this same idea like this. They'll take a piece of PVC and they'll wrap the coax around and around and around the PVC, and again this traps the RF current that's coming down the coax, and it doesn't get past this choke ballon. So you can make them yourselves. The critical thing is the number of turns, the number of feet. You're going to need about 18 feet of coax wrapped around this thing right here, wrapped around this piece. It looks like a piece of PVC. So you're going to have at least about 18 feet to make it where it will definitely stop any RF at whatever frequency you're going to be transmitting on. You need about 18 to 21 feet of coax. And you just wrap that much around here tightly next to each other, and then tie it off with some tie wraps, and you've got a choke ballon. Some people mount these right up there near the antenna, wherever that is, as the very next thing from the antenna. But some antennas, especially wire antennas, require a certain amount of what's called counterpose wiring, coax, to function as the other side of the antenna. And mine does. The long wire that I'm using, the QSO King, I believe it requires 40 feet of coax to act like a counterpose against against the long wire. So in my case, I mounted mine right outside my window to the shack. So the antenna, the coax wire acts as a counterpose all the way until it gets outside my window, and then it runs into one of these choke ballons, and that stops the RF right there, and it doesn't come inside with me. So it depends on the type of antenna you're running. If you're running a dipole, a regular dipole that you constructed or something like that, you can put it should be placed right there where the wires come together, right below them. And then your coax comes off the end of it. There's a bunch of instructions on the internet of how to make these things. Like here's a little picture of one I saw on the internet. Again, notice it's 18 to 21 feet. That's the important part. And many ways to make these. You can use PVC. You could use a Coke bottle that you go around and around, a 2-liter Coke bottle or something like that. Again, you got to watch out on the minimum diameter that you can bend this coax, or you'll run the risk of breaking it. So you need to know that before you start winding up running one of these things. All right, there's another way to make a choke ballon, a little bit more expensive though, and that is to go out and buy a whole bunch of ferrite type magnets and mix what they come in various different mixes. I didn't know that until I started ham radio. There's different types of magnets. Let's just say it that way. And what you want to use is what's called Mix 31. Mix 31. And you can buy these on the internet, you know, however many you might need. And the only problem with this technique is that you need a whole bunch of them. You're going to need about, this is a large one. They come in different sizes. Let's pretend this was a small one, a small, what they call a bead ferret magnet. If you had those, you'd probably need 40 to 50 of these strung along the coax. The coax would go right in here, of course. You put 40 or 50 of these together, and that would do the same thing as that winding of that coax that I just showed you a minute ago. So the only problem with this, it takes a whole bunch of these to have the same effect. So could get a little pricey, but let's see, I thought I had one. Yeah, well, here's what one looks like. And if you open this up, you'd see a piece of coax, the coax running down through here with this whole tube is filled with about 40 Mix 31 ferrets around the coax. So it serves the same choke function as the winding of the coax around the PVC. This is another way to do it if you wanted to do it yourself. But you're going to need 40 to 50 to work, so it'd be effective on all bands. Now you can just jump out there and buy something, and yours truly did that. I jumped out there. It just so happens that the fella that makes the QSO King long wire also sells what he calls a line isolator. And here it is right here. It's not very expensive. And he's already constructed one. You can tell it's not very big. It's only 6 inches long or something like that. And basically I have this right outside my window. The coax coming from the antenna is plugged in right here, and then another piece of coax is here running into the shack. So this effectively stops all the RF right outside my window. And again, you can buy these commercially, and this one happens to be from the same guy that makes the QSO King long wire antenna that I have that I use for HF. Again, a line isolator or a choke balun, same thing. So I hope that's helped you a little bit with grounding. And again, I want to refer you to this chart. This is how your equipment should be grounded right behind the desk that you're operating on. Again, single point ground. All the ground braids or copper straps, they all go to one spot and then they go straight outside. They do not do this. Okay? Again, you'll have ground loops if you do it this way. All right, so with that said, the next one will be the ground rod part of it, which is outside out in the yard, and I'll go out there and take a few pictures, and then our next session will be on how the ground rod and how I attached all this to the ground rod. It's very easy though. Anyway, as I always say, hope this helped you in some way, and I wish you clear skies and 73, and remember to keep looking up to see the greatest show on earth, like this picture on my screen, every single night, wherever you live, right over your head. See y'all later.